My question follows very nicely from your discussion with Rahul, kind of on a similar topic, but about an experience I had yesterday that I'm trying to um, digest. So I was noticing that um, when I act, I was meditating as the form of action in this moment, but it applies more generally to like all my actions. There's like the action comes from a drive, a desire that's kind of this tension that pushes me into whatever action that I'm acting. And uh, the way I was relating to it yesterday, before I had this shift, was I have this tension, this desire, and there's a suffering in that. So I'm like making a problem out of it. It's like my problem. And because it's my problem, that's where the suffering and the desire came from. And I I took the view instead that the universe or the self has an intention specifically to come back to itself and kind of like rejoice in singularity, right? It's got this kind of like pressure. It's always walking towards itself in this way, at the self-equal level. And when I internalized that, I had this shift where it was really shocking, and it's what, we've read about and talked about, and it hasn't really stayed very firmly, but I can access it now a bit too, which is that the whole time the I who is acting and desiring is not me, the individual, but it is kind of the divine actor. Like, and I always thought that I am like uh an object in the world, and what we call the self is like this other thing, which is like the the universe around me or something, and that like it goes into this abstract self. But I realize that no, you literally mean the self, like I am the self, uh, which never made sense to me before. But it's like it's actually you. It's like a very like I I I would have been incredibly shocked, except there was like no one to be shocked. But it would have been the most shocking thing otherwise. But it was also just like, there's nobody to have a reaction to it when that insight came. And you know, the world still was the same and still is now. Um, but now there's like more, because I had that, I can like much more deeply believe in what you and Rahul were just discussing. Because like I can truly see and reconnect to it when I tune into it, that this I who's acting is not anything but the universe's activity, right? The self's activity kind of like shining through. And there's something I'm confused about, because one is that I keep on forgetting this. And so I have to intentionally go back to it. I'm not sure why that's happening. It's the same kind of healing addiction habit you just talked about, but this still feels kind of odd that something so striking would be so easily like covered up. And then also, uh, we talk about how, none of this is happening, even if in great detail. And at the same time, like this felt uh like I didn't see why a liberation couldn't include this world, if that was the way it could be. If you can just be kind of a flow of divine action. That sounds like a very liberated state, even though it doesn't include a complete annihilation. So it feels like I haven't uh, understood something.
Thank you, something. Lots and lots of stuff you said there.
Yeah.
Is there any part of it specifically you wanted me to respond to?
Yeah, that last part, that like, in some like yogic and tantric traditions, they talk about the self as having like Icha Shakti, which is like relates to multiplicity, but it's like the creative impulse and desire, which is what it felt like, this activity coming through me. It felt like that description. And that's not really discussed in those words in this tradition, although in Who Am I, Ramana Maharshi does talk about like the self has like it exudes the world like a web from a spider. It kind of maybe is reminiscent there, but I'm not sure if that's the right. If, I'm not sure if that was like a moment of him giving like a lower teaching inside that or not. So I guess my specific the area that I think would be most helpful is to
Yeah,
understand this experience in the perspective of the teaching.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you, something. So I know we talk about this, you mentioned this tradition, this teaching. Truthfully, there isn't sort of a tradition or a teaching. It's just a spontaneous expression in the moment. And maybe we can call, if there are patterns that occur in that spontaneous expression, we can call that a tradition. But it's not like Tom has a tradition that he's adhering to. It's not about tradition. It's actually about what's true, what's real. So it's not like, oh, this tradition expresses this way, and in our tradition, we express it that way. You sometimes hear teachers speak like this. They'll say, oh, in yoga, this is the approach to liberation. And in Vedanta, this is the approach to liberation. In Tantra, we have a different approach in Tantra. We're a Tantric school. And someone else, oh, we're this school. We have that approach. This is very, from my point of view, this doesn't make sense. It's not like, oh, we have a tradition, we're approaching it this way. It's just what's the most effective way for that person. That's the way to share it. It's what works. Do you see what I mean?
Mm.
Okay. I'll touch upon that main question of yours. The main question you asked was essentially, why cannot liberation include the body, mind, and world and the phenomenal appearance? Why does it have to be nirvikalpa or nirguna, as the Vedas say? The Vedas say it has to be nirguna, without
Yeah.
gunas, without qualities. And the Vedas say the self is homogeneous. Homogeneous means it's the same everywhere, as opposed to heterogeneous, which means it's different, it varies. Homogeneous means it's the same everywhere. It doesn't, no movement, doesn't change, unchanging, without any, um, without any imagination in it, without any movement in it, without any creation in it. This is what the Vedas and the Upanishads tell us. They tell us this because it's the truth, as they are revealed to us, or as they see it. My opinion, and I don't know if this is true or not, my opinion is that the first bit I know is true. That if you look at the original tantric teachings, I say no is true. This is my reading tells me. My reading could be wrong. But my studies have shown me when you look at the original tantric teachings, they say exactly the same thing. So nowadays, tantra, in the world of non-duality at least, is explained as Shiva Shakti are one. Shiva means the self, Shakti means Maya, or that which is moving. There are these two principles. One's the we can say masculine if we want to be a bit antiquated. One is the unmoving masculine principle, Shiva, and one is the moving aspect, the divine feminine, Shakti. Yeah, and these two are one. You cannot have one without the other. That's the idea. Whenever there's Shiva, there's Shakti. Whenever there's Shakti, there's Shiva. So these two are actually together. They're the same thing, Shiva Shakti. And non-duality is the embracing of these two. Seeing the consciousness, which is Shiva, and the contents of consciousness, which is Shakti, as one. Okay. This was never there in the original tantric teachings. Original tantric teachings was Shakti eventually goes into Shiva and disappears. And all there's left is, you can't call it Shiva or Shakti, it's just that. While Maya or Shakti is there, we say the stationary aspect is Shiva and the moving aspect is Shakti. But when it all goes into oneness, self-realization, Atma Jnana, Atma Vidya, then we can't call it Shiva Shakti. It's just beyond description. This is the original tantric teachings. This is what Bhagavan Ramana tells us was in the original tantric teachings too. If you ever read what he says about tantra, he says this is the tantric teaching too. But then what happens in every teaching, whether it's Advaita Vedanta, tantric teachings, the intellectuals come along. They can't accept this truth of the Vedas. They can't accept the truth of the tantras. And the intellectuals are the great propagators of religion, typically, because they're the people who write the books. And they're the custodians of the words of the teaching. And it's through books and through words and through argument and logic and rhetoric that these teachings propagate and get spread en masse. And these are the Rajasic intellects. They can't accept, because they're attached and addicted to the world and to Maya, they can't accept that Maya is an illusion. I mean, Bhagavan is so adamant about this, that Maya is an illusion, not real, non-existent. There are many accounts of him saying, no, it's, people come up to me with all sorts of arguments about war, about death, about all these things, about bodily pain. He says, it's all an illusion. It's all a fiction. It's not real. It doesn't exist at all. But the intellects couldn't accept it. So then they have to keep on bringing back Maya. They keep on saying, well, actually, Shiva Shakti, when we say self-realization, it all becomes one with Shakti. It becomes one with the movement. Phenomena exist. So the original teachings, the deeper teachings say there is no Shakti. There is no movement in the self. There are no phenomenal risings. But the intellectual distortions keep on bringing that back up again. We see this in Advaita Vedanta as well, where later commentators say things like, when they say the mind is destroyed, they don't really mean the mind is destroyed. They just mean one aspect of the mind is destroyed. And that's what they mean by destruction of mind. They don't mean destruction of mind. When they see when the texts say that something is unreal, they don't mean it's unreal. They just mean it's changing, and that's what the word unreal actually means. So they have to reinterpret the whole scripture. Your question was not about that. Your question was, why, if we put all that aside, the reason I point that out though is just so you know, when you talk about tantric teachings, go back to the original tantric texts. They don't speak in the same way that these modern day tantric speakers speak. For example, there's a whole school called Kashmir Shaivism, which is a new school. It didn't exist. I mean, I say new. It's about 400 years old or something, or it might be a bit older than that. It might be from the 1200s, so 800 years old. But tantric tradition goes back thousands of years. If you read the older tantric texts, they don't speak like these newer texts that in the last few hundred years, which are propagated by the intellectuals, where everything makes sense to the mind. If you have a spiritual teaching where the entire teaching makes complete sense to the mind, it is an alarm bell. Yeah. Because these tantric teachings, these teachings that incorporate Shiva Shakti, they make complete sense. The mind understands it. It makes complete sense. True teachings don't make sense, unfortunately, to the mind, but to the heart, it makes sense. The heart knows the truth, non-verbally, intuitively. Heart always knows the truth. I can try and give you some logical arguments. This is what I'm going to try and do. Let me know if I succeed. I'm going to try and give you some logical arguments as to why there can be no body, mind, or world in a liberation, why it has to go. As long as there is a world, good things will happen and bad things will happen. And that means if a world exists in liberation, it means you fundamentally don't care about bad things happening in the world. It means you have to not care about children dying in various wars across the world. You have to not care about rape or crimes or violence. You just have to be happy in yourself, even though all these other things are happening. Because liberation is the cessation of all suffering. So that's one logical argument I could try and convince you with, right? You would have to not worry about those things. And how can you justify that? If that is a part of the reality, if these things are a part of reality, how can that not cause suffering?
It's part of the unfolding of thy will.
Yeah. But then what you're saying is suffering is also a part of the unfolding, right?
Yes.
And therefore, liberation cannot be the cessation of suffering, right? Which is what these people say, by the way. A lot of these people say, actually, in liberation, suffering continues. Maybe they'll say you're not attached to the suffering.
Right.
Suffering comes and goes, but that is suffering still. So you've then contradicted all the scriptures, which say that suffering 100% ends in liberation. No suffering remains. But then you have to distort it to say, well, suffering comes and goes. It's accepted as a part of the flow. But that means that suffering doesn't end. So then we can come with this idea, well, maybe it doesn't end, but it's transcended, it's allowed, and it doesn't cause suffering in the way we ordinarily think. Suffering still occurs, but maybe it doesn't sting so much. But you'll find from your own experience, when suffering occurs, it does sting. It sounds nice as an idea. Oh, suffering comes and goes. It's a part of the process. But it's still actually suffering. And it won't be satisfactory to you. And you'll still be seeking. There's some other reasons, though. So that's to do with suffering. Yeah. The other one is to do with the nature of the self. You cannot know the nature of the self as long as there are phenomenal arisings. You cannot know that the self is birthless and deathless, so transcends death. You cannot know the immortal nature of the self as long as there are objects present. Because you'll never be sure, oh, is the self related to the body? Or is the consciousness that I call the self? Maybe it's dependent on the body. How do you know that the consciousness is free from the body, that exists prior to the body? You cannot know that unless you go nirvikalpa, nirguna, and discover what the reality is without the body being present.
Mm.
Otherwise, there's always a doubt. Maybe when this body dies, I die.
Right.
The only way you can know the immortal nature of the self is if the body is dead and you are still alive. The body is no longer present. The body is annihilated and you're still there. That's the only way you can know that the self or the consciousness that you are is unrelated to the physical body, right? Otherwise, there's always the doubt. Maybe you'll be attached to the body. You'll be like, well, maybe this body is the seat of my consciousness. So you have to remove the body from your consciousness till there's no trace of the body left, and then still see you're there. And then you realize, oh, I'm here prior to the body in your own experience. The mind, from the point of view of the mind might say, well, you've just, you know, a materialist might say, well, you are a body mind, and the consciousness comes from the body mind, and you've just taken the body mind out of your consciousness, right? And you're just fooling yourself that there's no body. It's not that there's no body, it's just that you can't perceive the body anymore. But when you do it yourself in your actual experience, it becomes, this is self-realization I'm talking about. It's so overwhelming and it's so permanent that there's no doubt.
Mm.
You lose the identity with the body.
Right.
So the third argument is testimony of sages. All the great sages say this. And some sages don't say it. I would claim they're not maybe the great sages then. And then so you have to discern. A whole bunch of people are saying it, and then some aren't. Then you have to look at their teachings and look at what they're saying. And the ones who do say it say that suffering completely ends, and you will not be satisfied until you reach that. And the other ones say, well, suffering still continues, but certain types of suffering drop away. But when certain types of suffering drop away, that's not enough for you as a seeker. You will not stop seeking until all suffering drops away. You won't be satisfied if just some suffering drops away. You'll be compelled to seek until all suffering ends, till ego and duality is completely annihilated. Another reason is a practical reason that you can experiment with, right? It's not possible to de-identify with the body mind or to disidentify with the body mind as long as you're seeing it. You'll see, no matter how hard you try to disidentify the body mind, maybe be the witness, remain as the witness, disidentify with the ego, disidentify with the mind, not identify with these things. Try as much as you like. You might succeed for a period of time, whatever that
Right.
is. You'll find you will always get sucked back into it again.
Right. It's like seeing is believing, but the other side of that.
Exactly. Exactly. It's when you see the dream, you keep on getting sucked back into it. It's just the nature of Maya. So there's another point. You can experiment with it. You can try and say just be the witness, and then literally 5 minutes later, you will not be the witness anymore. You'll be involved in something.
Right. Yeah, that's
Unless you limit all your activities, you might be able to do it for a bit longer. But then as soon as you have to do something, you know, then you get attached to the body mind world again. It's the practical reason. So I've given you a few reasons. I'll be interested for you to counter them. And then then that will help me come up with some more counters to what your counters are.
right. Well, what
We don't have to do that now, but we can a bit if you want to.
not a counter, but maybe I have something in me that like accepts all of that, but then doesn't come to the same conclusion exactly that you're implying, which is that uh it feels like there doesn't have to be such a difference we're making between appearance and non-appearance. And that this idea of like, is the world appearing or is the world not appearing? It's not so simple as to say that's just duality, and so it doesn't count. It's even that there's a way to experience the world, and once you settle into that way, it's all one. But that's not the same as rejecting the realityness
Yeah.
of this reality. It's just saying we settle into the other, looking at the dual of this world, and that side of the coin is just
That's
set.
that's the that's the way to flip-flop. Okay. That's the way to flip-flop. What do I mean? You can settle into that and you can feel that this whole manifestation, creation is one with the consciousness or one with the presence or one with God. But it'll be temporary. You can't do that permanently. You can do it temporarily.
Right.
That's exactly what I was saying. So you can see everything as one. you can even have a deep realization or feeling. Let's call it, it's not actually a realization, it's a feeling.
Right.
You can have a feeling that all is one, or it's a thought. It's for most people, I suspect it's a belief system.
Yeah.
It's actually a subtle belief. It's not actually even subtle. I'm just saying subtle to be polite. It's a belief system that it's an intellectual framework that says everything you see is consciousness and the manifestation of consciousness, and these are one.
Yeah.
It's a framework. And that framework, you can convince yourself it's true until certain things in life happen, and then you'll forget all about it and you'll get scared and you get triggered because you still fundamentally don't believe it. You fundamentally still think you're a body, but now you're a body mind believing a framework that you are consciousness and everything you see is one with consciousness. And you can kind of drop into that for a short amount of time, but it's always going to be temporary because the
Yeah.
true realization is not there.
Right. Well, the one way to maybe put it further then is that if the reality was such that there really is this multiplicity and this unity as two things that are two sides of the same coin, if I take that perspective, that doesn't actually stop me from seeing the multiplicity. So I still have the problem of getting stuck. I have to completely believe and surrender to the other side of the coin and just believe that that's all there is, and then I'll be happy. Even if that wasn't true, it doesn't matter. It's just about once you form that belief, that'll be your complete reality. And so that's that. And uh just because you believe something doesn't mean
But
it's true.
so can I try and summarize what you said and then we can talk about it. So what you're saying is let's imagine that this universe, the reality of this universe is that phenomena are present and they are one with some sort of consciousness or base. Yeah, so there's a unity there. There's a genuine unity, but the unity is there with objects, with phenomena being present, right? There are a few things here. Yeah, that would mean that there is no end of suffering, first of all, because while phenomena are present, as long as you're experiencing things as a human being,
Mm.
you're going to have ups and downs. Yeah, it means you're gonna, it means that you can have a panic attack. It means you can be confused. It means you can get dementia. You can get disease. It means you're going to be worried about your wife or husband or son or daughter or mother, father, friend, cousin dying or becoming unwell, right? As long as the body will go through those things, right? That's one thing. If that was true, there's actually no possibility of realization in terms of cessation of suffering. Yeah. Second thing, how do you know it? How would you realize? How would you realize that all is one? It would just be an intellectual belief. It'd be an intellectual framework. How would you realize that the consciousness is prior to the body mind and everything is a manifestation of the consciousness? How would you actually realize that? That's another thing. That's the second question. There's no mechanism, there's no method by which that can actually be realized. Third thing, how would you explain that you are conscious through some of it and not through Tom? Why are you some of it and not Tom? Right? So haven't we got two consciousnesses now? We've got Tom's consciousness, right? And we've got some of its consciousness. So now we've got two consciousnesses. Yeah. And then
I don't know.
what about Hester and Lance over here? They've got their consciousness and Hester's got her consciousness. How do you know? So now we've got four consciousnesses. So this is a dualistic view. There's nothing, now maybe the universe is fundamentally dualistic, right? But we can't say this is all one. Because how can we say that how can I say that some of its consciousness, same as Tom's consciousness? How would you know? And why are you some of it? And why am I Tom? Who's decided that? Why are you not Tom? And why am I not some of it? Why am I not seeing through Hester? Hester's, mind and eyes and sense organs. Why am I seeing through Tom's? Who's ordained all this stuff? Why is it like this? It's just luck. So then we've gone away from unity now. Because we're saying, look, this is, how do you know this? How do you know any unity? Why is it, how can you claim that is unity? There must be, we're describing duality, aren't we? We've got some of its consciousness and we've got Tom's consciousness. And maybe if I, chop some of its head off, his consciousness will disappear, but Tom's consciousness will continue, right? Or vice versa. You chop Tom's head off, Tom's consciousness will disappear and some of its consciousness will continue. That means you've got two different consciousnesses. And how would you know otherwise? How can you claim there's unity? How can you claim there's oneness? What is your means to know that? How would you discover that?
Hard to put words to it, but it feels like you can experience both at the same time.
That's a feeling.
Yeah.
Then what you're saying basically is, and there's nothing wrong with that. This, by the way, you can say, look, my experience is that of some kind of wholeness, some kind of unity in my experience. I'm not making a claim about the universe. I'm not making a claim about consciousness. You can say that legitimately in Maya. You can say, I'm not making a claim about the universe. I'm not making a claim about God. I'm not making a claim about prior to the body mind. I'm not making a claim about surviving the body mind. All I'm saying is that in my current experience, there's a unity, a
Mm,
wholeness. That is totally legitimate. So you can say that, and that's your intuition, right?
yeah.
What you're actually intuiting is the oneness of Maya. But we can explain it as, my experience is that there's a oneness here. There's a sense of oneness and togetherness and harmony, and maybe ease most of the time, and flow, right? But notice a few things. So this is that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But notice a few things. You cannot say that there's only one consciousness.
Mm,
Yeah.
right.
You cannot say that consciousness precedes the body. You cannot say consciousness survives the body. You cannot even say I'm not the body mind
Mm,
because you
right.
don't know. You're agnostic to these things.
Have those problems.
Yeah. And you cannot say that Tom's consciousness is the same as some of its consciousness
Yeah.
because you've no way of knowing. You can't make any of those claims.
Yeah.
And
It's
you
just an
can't claim to end suffering. You can just claim to reduce it in a way.
yeah. Mm,
You can't even really claim to non-duality. You can claim to sort of a feeling of harmony,
yeah.
not even non-duality. You wouldn't call it non-duality. You would say it's um, it's a spontaneous arising happening,
Yeah.
but you can't make any other claims, which is fine. You can do that. But suffering doesn't end. Suffering may lessen, which is nice, which is
Yeah.
good. What you're saying is actually what most non-dual teachings are saying, but they make further claims, which you cannot substantiate.
Yeah. Yeah. You're saying that
Basically,
I'm having an experience, which is a wonderful experience, but I can't make these claims about the nature of reality from that. I can just say this is nice.
exactly. And that is basically what you're calling unity or oneness is basically this is not actually oneness or unity.
Right.
It's just this is nice. And that's fine. If that's all you want as well, you can stop there. That's fine too. The problem is if you're a seeker, if you're a genuine seeker, your mind won't let you stop or your heart won't let you stop because you're not that's not satisfactory.
Right.
It can be satisfying if you have got a very pleasant life. So, for example, you haven't got any relationship issues, you haven't got any financial issues, you haven't got any health issues, you know, then that's enough. But as soon as you have problems in these areas, one or more of these areas, your health, your finances, your relationships, or these problems in people you love and care for, you know, then this foundation, you'll see it's built on sand. And suffering will come back. And then you'll want a deeper teaching. Usually people don't come to Bhagavan's teaching unless they've experienced something like this. Some people do, but most people won't be attracted to nirvikalpa teachings, which are much more extreme, but actually liberating, unless they're much unhappier. You see, the other form of non-duality, sometimes I call it middle class non-duality, because in the UK, middle class means the sort of top 10% of the population. Maybe not the very top, but maybe, I don't know, the 1 to the 10%. You know, people who are well off, who don't have financial struggles, and you know, these sorts of people, very respectable and they've got nice lives. Then this non-duality, it suits them. What do you call it in the US? Is it middle class? We call it in the UK middle class, but I think in the US middle class means like what we would call working class, the working class. Is there a word for like those sorts of well-off people who they're not super rich, but they're doing pretty well?
Yeah, probably upper class or wealthy.
Yeah. So upper class. See, in the UK, upper class are those sort of aristocrats and the nobility and those sorts of people. But yeah, upper class spirituality, we can call it that. Yeah, spirituality for wealthy people. And then these Shiva Shakti teachings work fine temporarily until they stop. But it's actually intellectual framework. And you can't, unless you don't make those claims about the nature of reality, which is fine then. But then there's always a fear there.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know about immortality, then there's the fear of death and the fear of your loved ones dying. So these existential forms of suffering are still there in you. The reason I can talk about all this is because I went through all this stuff, you know. So I'd be very happy for you to reflect upon these teachings and then come back more, and come up with some counters of how you see it or how it might be different. Because by doing that, you allow me to express, by your first set of counters there, you allow me to explain it even in a deeper way. Otherwise, I tend not to explain it. So do come back to me if you want to. Okay. Mhm. Um, just a reminder, who am I? Question 5. I'll read it without the brackets because the brackets are not present in the original in the original writing. Question 5, who am I? Will there not be realization of the self, even while the world is there? Answer, there will not be. Question 6, why? This is Sambit's question. Question 6, and who am I? Who am I? The teaching the teacher gives is roughly proportionate to the maturity of the seeker or the intensity or earnestness of the seeker. You can see that Shiva Prakashan Pillai, who was the gentleman asking these questions, was a devoted, earnest seeker because of the quality of responses that Bhagavan gives. To a lesser devotee, to a less earnest seeker, or to a seeker who's not really a spiritual seeker, they wear the clothing, they have the badge, but they're not really earnest. It's entertainment for them. He gives a superficial teaching. You see this in other texts in the collected works. You see he gives much more superficial teachings to the same questions. In text Who Am I? We get a very deep teaching very quickly. On the first page, we get these teachings. Will there not be a realization of the self, even while the world is there? Answer, there will not be. Question 6, why? The seer and the objects seen are like the rope and the snake. Just as the knowledge of the rope, which is the substrate, will not arise unless the false knowledge of the illusory serpent goes, so the realization of the self, which is the substrate, will not be gained unless the world is removed. Question 7. When will the world, which is the object seen, be removed? Answer. When the mind, which is the cause of all cognition and of all actions, becomes quiescent, the world will disappear. And the questions go on in a relatively logical way to unfold the teaching. I'll confess, if you look at the answer to question 6 in the collected works, it doesn't read exactly how I read it. I changed it slightly to make it more accurate. Here it actually says, the realization of the self, which is the substrate, will not be gained unless the belief that the world is real is removed. Whereas the actual text in the original Tamil says, the realization of the self, which is the substrate, will not be gained unless the world is removed. And if you read the Sri Sadhu Om translation, which is more accurate, you'll see that. And it also makes sense because the next question is question 7 is, when will the world, which is the object seen, be removed? That question will never be asked if Bhagavan said, unless the belief that the world is real is removed. Then the question 7 would have read, when will the belief that the world is real be removed? But the question 7 doesn't say that. It says, when will the world, which is the object seen, be removed? We also have these teachings in Guru Vachakakovai, recorded by Muruganar, which also confirm my interpretation, which is also my own personal experience too. So all these teachings, they come from my own personal experience, as Bhagavan's teachings come from his personal experience. I hope you don't mind if I bring Satsang to a close there. Thank you, everyone. All is Bhagavan. Everything happening is Bhagavan's will. Let his will be done. Love him, surrender to him, submit to him. You will see he is the only reality. He appears to be many, and that is fine. But in truth, he is one, beyond words. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Arunachala Ramanaya. Om Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat. Thank you, everyone.